did.
Oh, you're not going to ask me a question? Okay. I'm Jack Manning. I'm president and executive director of the Beaver County Chamber of Commerce. Been in this role for 2 years, but I've got 40 years worth of business experience. Been involved with the chamber since 2011 as a board member, and now running the organization. But prior to that, I had 37 years in the chemical industry, started my own consulting business, and a very eclectic background. I've been a director of quality performance, director of human resources, a plant manager, director of manufacturing, very eclectic career and background. I've been involved in multiple nonprofit charities and boards and the like, which I think prepared me pretty well for the job at the Chamber, which is a very diverse organization. So that's who I am.
All right, so can you define diversity for us?
Well, I can tell you what diversity means to me and how I've practiced diversity throughout my whole career, and particularly here. Diversity to me means diversity of thought. So from an organizational standpoint, you have to have diverse inputs and able to be an effective leader and solve problems. And at the end of the day, any organization, any business, it's about marshaling resources, solving problems, and leading an organization forward. And you can't do that if everybody has the same background, same education, same thought process. When I was a plant manager, if I surrounded myself with 10 white male engineers, I wasn't going to get a whole lot of diversity of thought in solving that problem. And there's some very profound education that I had early in my career, some whole brain thinking. I don't know how familiar you are with Carl Jung and psychology and right brain, left brain stuff, but it's very important to me and very important to an organization to look at it as a whole brain. And not to get too detailed and into the weeds, but the brain's broken up into cerebric and limbic parts. But there are people that believe there's 4 quadrants that form the brain, and there's 4 different aspects of thinking that everybody has. And some of your thinking dominates other parts of what your brain and how your brain thinks and calculates. So if you look at it as a circle divided into 4 quadrants, there is an upper left part of your brain that's very analytical, very fact-based. There's a lower left that is very detail-oriented, procedural-oriented. Then there's one that's kind of emotional and people-oriented, and then there's this upper right-hand side that's very big picture and entrepreneurial, visionary. So as you go around, I've always attacked every problem by, do I have all the facts? Is it doable? What's the impact on people? And how does it affect the big picture of where we're trying to take the organization? And I'm constantly going around that circle and trying to make sure I have all the facts. It is something that's implementable and doable. What's going to be the impact on people? And is it going to drive us where we want to go as an organization? And in order to get that whole brain thinking, you've got to get people in which they have a preference for thinking of things that way. I've had experiences where engineers designed a great product. One was a drum filling station. And you go out into operations, the guy said, well, we can't use it, it isn't practical. So it says, they never factored in the impact on the people doing the job, on whether it worked. Brilliant engineer design, but it didn't work in the workplace. So I'm constantly doing that. So to me, diversity is, how do I ensure that I've got that diversity of thought there? And the best way to do that is to factor in that some of this is by nature and some is by nurture and training. So people that have different experiences bring those different perspectives to the table. African Americans have different life experiences than white folks do. It's just a fact, regardless of where they are raised. Asians, the same thing. Foreign-born folks in general just have different life experiences of growing up, going to school, raising a family. So those experiences in terms of gender, race, sexual identity are all important factors that make up, I think, the best mix of an organization. So when I think of diversity, I think of diversity of thought first and foremost, but the way to get that diversity of thought is to make sure that we have a diverse workforce by every way that you can measure diversity, race, gender, and the like. So that's my long-winded explanation and definition, but it's worked for me. And I gotta tell you, everything I do factors into that whole brain thinking. And are we engaging the right people? This region as a whole needs to be more diverse. Because if an organization or even a community becomes too inbred, you are missing the big picture of the experiences of the rest of the world. I believe most prejudice, most fear, and everything else is by people who were born and raised in a bubble and never experienced anything outside of that bubble. And that's not sustainable. This region and most businesses have to become more diverse. So,
Perfect.
anything more?
Awesome.
I can probably teach a class on this if I wanted to.
Alright.
Can you tell us what management challenges it may create in the workplace?
Well, my whole brain theory is can be very chaotic. So if you take a typical organization, when you look at those quadrants of the brain, several of them are polar opposites. So when you get those big picture visionary folks working in a team with the detailed oriented folks, there's an automatic conflict. And when you get those fact-based people working with the people that are people-oriented, there's an automatic conflict. So to give you an example, in a workplace, take a hospital, where you have hospital administrators, which are very lower left-brained oriented people. They're procedural oriented. And you get psychiatrists or people of a very right brain, and they say, we'd like to change all the wallpaper to a fuchsia with butterflies. And they're going, what? That's not in the policy. That's not the way we do things. We can't afford to do that. You have that. Or an even better example is you have many surgeons who are very upper left brain detail oriented, obviously, and that's, you want a surgeon to be very good at that. Most nurses come at things from that lower right hand people side, and you have nurses saying, you have to do something for the pain, and the doctor very cavalierly say, well, I did. I said, give them 10 cc's of blah, 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 and just walking away. Like there's not the same level of caring, and that creates all kinds of conflict in an organization. And another, in the chemical industry, when they're trying to communicate with people who have a strong environmental bent, well, they usually, that environmental bent comes from a very lower right hand portion. It's a very emotional, you're killing me and my kids. That's a very emotional lower right perspective. If the chemical industry just brings out upper left brain engineers saying, well, no, it's only 2 parts per billion of this, it goes right over somebody's head. So communication has to be done in a way in which you're presenting something, you're actually thinking about your audience in terms of, do I have the procedural aspects to communicate to this group? Am I touching the right buttons from an emotional standpoint to satisfy this group that's very people oriented? Are the upper right brain, big picture people going to get that? And the trick is to do that without losing everybody's attention. So it creates an awful lot of communication challenges, but at the end of the day, again, I think it's worth it just because you have a much better result and a much better, stronger organization.
What are your diversities here at the Chamber?
Well, the Chamber's in its 45th year of operation, and I can tell you, while we don't necessarily have a defined diversity policy, how it's evolved over those 45 years is significant. My guess is, and I wasn't around then, but my guess is that when the Chamber was formed, the board of directors of the Chamber was probably 18 white males. That would be my guess. And all coming from business and industry. And the Chamber has evolved through wanting to be more collaborative, more transparent, more representative of the community, in that our board of directors today has 3 African Americans, 7 women, the rest men, but it also includes educational institutions, nonprofits, municipalities, small business owners, as well as business and industry. And again, I think that diversity of that board made up in those manners has made us much more effective as a platform for speaking on behalf of community and business development in Beaver County. So from a practice standpoint, that's how it evolved. Did it happen by edict or policy or some law? No, but it was a natural way for us to make sure that we were a representative of the community and an effective platform and be able to speak on behalf of the community with legislators and other folks to get the kind of benefits and amenities that Beaver County needs to survive.
I wouldn't do it well in real office.
All right, yes! That was great! She gets it! Now she knows what it's like to be a minority!
Okay, so we watched the clip. What were your thoughts on it?
Well, as a prior HR manager and director for a company, it's a great learning of what not to do, obviously. But it does show the importance of the sensitivities. There's an emerging trend in this country to ignore political correctness, and that somehow that's holding us back. But to me, it couldn't be more wrong-headed, about as wrong-headed as the way he was going about that diversity training by insulting people. It's not political correctness. It's just being an effective leader, understanding the diversity of backgrounds and cultures that people have. So I think the more that you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes, the more effective you can be as an employee, as a leader, as a business person, as anything else. That empathy, having empathy for the situation that somebody was raised in, is so vitally important. And that's simply understanding everybody's circumstances, where they come from. Little things. I always just say, nobody comes to work for the first day and says, I'm going to give this company the worst 20 years of work they ever saw in their life. Everybody's enthusiastic about joining an organization, joining any company to do a good job. But little things that can happen that undermine or demean end up zapping people's enthusiasm to do a job, ends up creating a situation where you have employees who have issues. And you don't know whether that employee has family issues at home, whether there's drug addiction issues, whether there's cultural family issues or not. So just having that empathy to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes is important. And that's a lot of what diversity training is about. Just be aware and be empathetic to what those persons' circumstances are like. And I think, it's so vitally important.
Yeah, probably not the best to do what Michael Scott did.
No, I mean, pushing the envelope like that until you get somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, we always had policies everywhere Mark and I've instituted some of those. The biggest thing that you can do in an organization is have conflict resolution. And diversity, whole brain thinking, having those mix of people, by nature sometimes create conflict. But you have to be able to know how to intercede in that conflict when it occurs. But the biggest thing you can do is prevent it from happening. And the best way to prevent it from happening is when you have everybody in the same room, you're doing that cultural diversity kind of training, and everybody has, again, a more empathetic feel for the folks that they work with. I mean, there are times early in my career where I thought, boy, what a jerk that man or woman was. They just don't get it. But the more I learned, particularly about the whole brain, is, they're not a jerk. They're just coming at it from this perspective. So I need to understand the perspective they're coming from. And now, they're not a jerk. They just have a different way of looking at things, different perspective, different background, different upbringing, different education. So understanding that, having that empathetic nature helps prevent conflicts for the most part, but makes a much better, again, decision-making, problem-solving, effective organization going forward.
Yeah.